Life circumstances can turn a simple life into a nightmare, and, conversely, into unforgettable moments. It is good when there is someone close to you who reaches out a helping hand. Today's story, however, is not about a happy ending, but about circumstances that spiraled out of control and led to a terrible tragedy. Northfield, in the U.S. state of New Hampshire, is a small, picturesque town with fewer than 5,000 residents. It lies south of the White Mountains and is considered one of the safest places in the surrounding area. The crime rate there is low. Violent crimes are rare, especially crimes on the scale of today's tragedy. Quiet places like this are usually chosen by people who want to settle down with their families and raise children. That was exactly why a woman named Kassandra Sweeney had come there. She was born and raised near Northfield and had always dreamed of having her own little piece of paradise and a home where love and harmony would prevail. After graduating from high school, she went to college, where she met her future husband, Sean Sweeney. He also had traditional views about family, so the couple's plans matched. After they met, a romantic relationship began between them. They later got married, and shortly after the wedding, their first son, Benjamin, was born. That was in 2018. Then Sean experienced his first major shock. His mother died, but there was hardly any time to mourn the loss. The young father was not only working hard to provide for his growing family, but the fate of his younger brother Eric, who had been born in 2006, was also uncertain. Their mother had been raising the children on her own, so after her death, Eric could potentially have ended up in the care of social services. Sean was deeply worried that Eric might end up in a children's home or with a foster family. Sean took responsibility for his brother's guardianship. In the fall of 2020, the couple's second child was born, and they named him Mason. Kassandra was happy. She now dreamed of having a daughter and worked night shifts as a nursing assistant. While her husband focused completely on his work, she was building the life the couple had always dreamed of. On August 3, 2022, 25-year-old Kassandra was at her home in Northfield with 4-year-old Benjamin and Mason, who was due to turn 2 in 1 month. Her husband Sean was at work at the time. Sean was expecting a promotion at a large company. That was wonderful news for their family. Kassandra planned to quit her job so that she could devote herself entirely to the household and the children. Sean's 16-year-old brother Eric continued to live with the couple. He had been given the basement of the house where he had made himself at home. It seemed as though the Sweeneys had everything anyone could wish for. But the countdown to the end of this idyllic life had begun long before. August 3, 2022 started like any other day. Kassandra had been actively messaging her husband since the morning and sent him several photographs showing the children playing with their dogs. Then the communication suddenly stopped. Sean assumed that Kassandra simply had some everyday things to take care of. While he waited for a reply to his next message, he became absorbed in his work again. Shortly after 11 o'clock in the morning, the situation changed dramatically when his brother Eric called him. The young man was nervous and almost shouting into the phone. He said that intruders had broken into the house and that he wanted to chase them. From what Eric said, Sean concluded that Kassandra and the children had been hurt, although he did not learn any details. After his brother's call, Sean immediately called 911. The dispatcher received the call at 11:21 in the morning. A worried Sean explained that his younger brother, who lived in their home, had just called him. Sean suspected that members of his family had been injured, but he had no idea what exactly had happened. Judging from Eric's words, someone had entered the house and tried to rob the family, but Kassandra had stopped the criminals. How the whole thing had ended remained unknown. Sean asked the dispatcher to send help as quickly as possible in order to clarify the situation and help his family if necessary. He asked to be excused from work and also headed home. He warned the dispatcher that the police officers should be careful because one of his dogs behaved aggressively toward strangers. Within a few minutes, several police vehicles were outside the Sweeney family home. The officers knocked on the door but received no answer. They then decided to walk around the house and look through the windows. One of the officers noticed an adult woman and a child lying motionless in a pool of blood in the dining room. They decided to force open the front door in order to help them. As soon as they did so, Sean arrived. The first thing the officers found was the dead young woman with a small child lying beside her. They were later identified as Kassandra and Mason. Both had suffered fatal gunshot wounds to the head. A few steps away from the mother, they found 4-year-old Benjamin. He was lying on the floor of the dining room. It appeared as though the child had tried to run away from the attackers, but it was too late. He had suffered a gunshot wound to the head that had also killed him instantly. Benjamin had been shot in the face, just above his right eyebrow. Small, pinpoint burns caused by gunfire were found on his mother's face, which allowed laboratory experts to determine that the shot at the woman had been fired from a distance of approximately half a meter, practically at point-blank range. Little Mason's had been shot in the front of the head. The bullet passed through his skull and exited behind his left ear. Apart from the gunshot wounds, the victims had no other injuries. There was some minor disorder inside the house, but it apparently had nothing to do with the attack. The children had probably caused it before the massacre. None of the victims had time to defend themselves against the attackers or resist them. While investigators were examining the rooms, Sean's younger brother Eric arrived. He pulled into the driveway in Kassandra's vehicle and walked fairly calmly toward the police officers standing outside. They were speaking with Sean, who could barely contain his emotions. His behavior stood in stark contrast to the composure of the 16-year-old teenager. Eric said that he had chased the robbers but had been unable to catch them, which was why he had returned to help the others. But it was already too late. The whole story sounded strange. According to the medical examiner's findings, all 3 deaths were classified as homicides. The contradictions in the circumstances of the case immediately became apparent. If it had been a robbery, why were there no signs of forced entry? Why was nothing missing from the house? Although Eric had reported a struggle, Kassandra showed no corresponding injuries, as though the attackers had come with the intention of killing. But if that was the case, what was their motive? Everything seemed strange because no one had heard that the young woman had problems with anyone. No one was stalking or targeting the family. They had a healthy relationship without conflicts, no debts, and no addictions. The brutality of the attack suggested that the crime had been committed by someone who knew the victims and felt intense hatred toward them. Against that background, the widower was the first suspect who had to be thoroughly checked. When Sean was questioned, he could barely control himself. His behavior did not raise suspicion. Sean said that he and his wife had a wonderful relationship. They were not involved in any love triangle. Neither of them had been unfaithful, and they had no plans to divorce. His statements were confirmed by other family members, with the exception of his brother Eric. According to the teenager, the groundwork for the crime had been laid long before, because his older brother had allegedly been violent toward his wife. Interestingly, there was no evidence confirming this. The police checked the claims. To their surprise, instead of finding reports of domestic violence involving Sean, they found information about Eric. According to the records, he was a troubled teenager. This information was also confirmed by relatives of the married couple. Many had heard complaints about the teenager's problematic behavior and the difficulties Sean and Kassandra were facing with him. However, no one confirmed Eric's statements about domestic violence by Sean, and Sean himself denied them. During his conversation with police, Sean provided an alibi that could easily be checked. At the time of the attack, he really was at work and could not possibly have committed the crime. After his alibi was confirmed through witness statements and surveillance camera footage, Sean was removed from the list of suspects. By that time, there were already serious grounds for suspicion against another young man. Law enforcement now became interested in Sean's brother, Eric Sweeney, who had been at home when the unknown people allegedly attacked the family and opened fire. When the boy was asked to speak with police voluntarily, he behaved nervously but cooperated with investigators. At the police station, he even waived his Miranda rights, but because he was a minor, the questioning had to take place in the presence of an adult. Logically, the interview took place in the presence of his older brother Sean, his closest relative. Eric said that he had woken up early in the morning and taken care of his usual daily tasks. Everything went as normal. The teenager went upstairs to take a shower. As he passed by, he saw Kassandra with the children. She was doing her usual housework. The young man still lived with his family in the basement, so, after showering, he took his dirty laundry downstairs to put it into the washing machine. While the teenager was there, he heard a strange sound upstairs, as though something had broken. Then Eric heard a rough male voice, followed by several loud bangs. He believed they were gunshots. The young man was frightened and therefore did not dare leave the basement immediately, waiting until everything had become quiet. When the noise stopped, he went to the ground floor and saw Kassandra, Benjamin, and Mason there. All of the family members were covered in blood and showed no signs of life. Eric did not find the attackers at the scene, did not know whether the victims were still alive, but said that he saw an unfamiliar vehicle outside through the window. Without hesitation, he took his sister-in-law's vehicle and began chasing it. By the time he reached the yard, the attackers were supposedly just driving away. While the young man was starting the vehicle, he called his older brother and told him everything. Eric denied being involved in the attack on the family, but his story contained obvious gaps and inconsistencies with the evidence that had been found. Sean was still devastated. When he was asked about his relationship with his brother, he thought for a moment, and then his expression darkened. The police knew about the family dog that behaved aggressively toward strangers. There was a strong likelihood that the animal would have attacked strangers inside the house in order to protect the people living there. For that reason, investigators decided to try to catch the boy in a lie. When Eric was asked about the dog's behavior at the time of the attack, he claimed that the animals had remained silent. On the one hand, this could have indicated that the crime was committed by someone close to the victims whom the dogs knew. On the other hand, it sounded strange and contradicted the teenager's story. Investigators then learned that landscapers had been working on the neighboring property that morning. Investigators spoke with them as well, but no one confirmed Eric's statement. That morning, they had not seen any unfamiliar vehicles or people entering the house, let alone anyone running away from it so quickly. Instead, shortly after 11 o'clock, they heard some commotion, and a few minutes later, a young man who matched Eric's description ran through the front door. He was alone and very agitated, immediately got into Kassandra's vehicle and drove away. The witnesses' statements were confirmed after investigators reviewed footage from surveillance cameras mounted on houses in the neighborhood. Those cameras had not recorded any unfamiliar vehicles. The only vehicle that drove through the neighborhood was the one with 16-year-old Eric Sweeney behind the wheel. He appeared very disturbed and was in a hurry. No murder weapon was found inside the couple's home. Suspicion against the teenager grew stronger, so investigators began to believe that he might have deliberately driven away, not only to create the impression that he was chasing the attackers, but also to get rid of the pistol. Examination of the bullets removed from the victims' bodies showed that all three had been shot with a .40 caliber pistol. Significantly, Sean admitted that he owned such a weapon. However, it had disappeared from his home by that time. Investigators therefore decided to examine the vehicle Eric had been driving more closely and obtained a search warrant for it. Eric's palms were also to be examined because too little time had passed for all traces to have disappeared. If he had actually fired the weapon, gunshot residue would probably still have remained on his hands. On August 9, 2022, the results of the forensic examination became available. During Eric's questioning, swabs had been taken from his hands. Similar samples were taken from the surface of the steering wheel of the silver Ford F-150 he had driven. The person who had been behind the wheel had left a large amount of gunpowder residue on the steering wheel. Exactly the same traces were found on the outer and inner sides of Eric's hands. From that moment on, the suspicions against the young man were confirmed even further. Yet, he continued to deny responsibility for the murders of his family members. Investigators now tried to understand the motive for the crime. Eric's relationship with Sean had completely fallen apart. Sean no longer wanted to live under the same roof as the suspected murderer of his entire family. For that reason, the boy was placed under the supervision of youth services. Law enforcement remained in constant contact with the teenager. As long as he was considered a suspect, placing him with another family was out of the question. Sean, meanwhile, actively cooperated with investigators. He, too, had no doubt about his brother's guilt. He had serious reasons for that belief. Investigators decided to take a closer look at who Eric Sweeney was and what his relationship with the family had been like. Kassandra and Sean had been the young man's legal guardians since June 2019. The older brother did not want to think about Eric being placed in the care of strangers. He repeatedly discussed this with relatives and friends, and saw it as a good opportunity to do something for the well-being of the family. He knew that Eric had always had behavioral problems. Eric had often been in conflict with his mother and had even run away from home several times. At first, however, this did not appear to go beyond typical rebellious behavior. No one could have imagined that the teenager might be so dangerous. In the beginning, the relationship between the brothers, Kassandra, and the children was calm. Eric quickly settled into his new environment and into their family, and he even helped take care of his nephews. It was obvious, however, that the loss of his mother had affected him very deeply. During that period, the teenager became even more withdrawn than before. Eric had already shown mild psychological problems at an early age. When the teenager was 10 years old, neighbors complained to Sean about Eric. One woman claimed that she had seen the boy kill a cat in the street, but her statement could not be confirmed. The older brother did not always believe Eric because he had repeatedly been caught lying. But in this particular story, Sean took his side. Sean could not imagine Eric being capable of taking an animal's life. The situation, however, continued to get worse. The teenager's school performance fell to a minimum, but he did not care. Sean himself was a fairly successful, educated, and respected person, and therefore wanted to support his brother. Unfortunately, Eric strongly resisted this, and relationships within the family gradually began to deteriorate. When the possibility of expelling the teenager from school arose, this became the peak of Eric's rebellious adolescence. By that point, neither Kassandra nor Sean wanted to continue supporting his behavior. The teenager refused to listen to them and declared that instead of going to school, he would work. But time passed, and he continued living at his brother's and sister-in-law's expense while doing nothing. Every attempt to get through to him only led to more conflict. Several months before Kassandra, Sendrich, and the children were murdered, tensions between Eric and Sean became even greater. The widowed man confirmed that his brother had recently behaved in an especially provocative and aggressive manner. This led to constant conflicts between the two of them, which pushed Kassandra to her limits. At the time of the attack, Sean and Eric barely had any contact because of the growing misunderstandings between them. And the young mother had become so tired of trying to maintain the connection between them that she withdrew as well. What worried the couple most was that they were also arguing because of Eric and no longer knew how to deal with the situation. Several weeks before the triple murder, Sean called the police and filed reports against his brother several times. The reasons was his fear that Eric's behavior could become dangerous for his wife and children. Sean claimed that his brother had become completely out of control. He said that Eric had threatened Kassandra and had even struck at her and his nephews. The first police report was filed on June 6, 2022. Sean called the police station and said that his vehicle had been stolen while he had left the house with his wife and children. While police were driving to the scene, Sean looked around and realized that Eric had once again run away from home and taken the family vehicle. Remarkably, valuable objects and money that had been lying in the open had also disappeared in the same way. During incidents like this, the teenager would meet up with friends. They drove around town, drank alcohol, or used illegal substances. The teenager was found without difficulty and brought back. The vehicle was undamaged, and Sean withdrew the report. He did not want to cause problems for his brother. The next disturbing incident occurred on July 22nd. The reason for the report was a series of strange statements by Eric, who had threatened Sean and Kassandra. In the heat of another argument about his behavior, the teenager blurted out that he had hidden a firearm in the garage of the house. He claimed that he would use it at night while everyone was sleeping. The older brother called the police, who thoroughly searched the garage with him but found nothing. Since Eric had not physically attacked anyone before, no criminal offense was established. The officers simply left again. The family's concern reached such a level that Sean installed a lock on the door of the couple's bedroom and on the children's bedroom doors, and he even considered throwing Eric out of the house. He repeatedly discussed these problems with his relatives and said several times that he regretted taking over the guardianship. The climax of this family drama came on August 2nd, one day before the shooting at the Sweeney home. Cash belonging to Kassandra had once again disappeared, after she had left it unattended for only a few minutes. When Sean came home from work, his wife complained to him about Eric. Another conflict followed. According to Sean, he did not hold back in what he said during this argument, because the entire family was tired of the troubled teenager's behavior. This time, Eric once again threatened to shoot, and Sean threatened to throw him out of the house. No one called the police because the family no longer believed that doing so would accomplish anything. Further investigation showed that the couple's bedroom was not locked on the day of the triple murder. Apparently, the teenager had deliberately chosen that moment to gain access, or Kassandra had simply failed to pay attention to the lock and forgotten to close it. Sean had not installed the locks without a reason. He was afraid that Eric might gain access to his safe, where he kept a firearm for self-defense, a .40 caliber pistol. Normally, Sean kept a close eye on it and expected his wife to do the same. But something went wrong that day. When investigators entered the couple's bedroom on the first day of the investigation, Sean showed them the safe, which had been forced open. Some of the ammunition was still inside, but the fully loaded pistol was missing. Some cartridges were missing as well. According to Sean, there had been enough ammunition for several magazines. The lack of signs of forced entry and the fact that the perpetrator knew how to get to a firearm that had not been kept in plain sight indicated that the robbery theory could be ruled out. The killer knew his victims and the house well. Eric accumulated and were confirmed. It became clear that the pistol might have been hidden and that only the troubled teenager had access to it and was apparently ready to open fire at any moment. It was obvious that investigators had to act quickly. They therefore began checking the geolocation data from Eric's mobile phone. Because he had called Sean while he was behind the wheel, he apparently had not thought of leaving his phone at home when he drove away to dispose of the weapon, meaning that his movements could be tracked. 3 days after the search for the killer began, investigators started combing the wooded area near the Sweeney family home. The location had not been chosen at random. Eric's mobile phone geolocation data pointed to it. Unfortunately, the data was not very precise and did not make it possible to find the weapon immediately. The police needed more than a day to get a result. But it was worth it. They found a .40 caliber pistols and almost 20 rounds of ammunition with it. A further ballistic examination confirmed that this exact weapon had been used to murder the Sweeney family. 2 sets of fingerprints were found on the grip and on the cartridges. They belonged to the owner of the weapon and to his brother, Eric. The suspect continued to deny his involvement in the crime, but the evidence against him was extremely convincing. Based on the evidence collected, he was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, as well as falsifying physical evidence. The teenager completely refused to cooperate with investigators and demanded a lawyer. A court-appointed defense attorney was assigned to the main suspect and immediately began working on the case. As expected, the lawyer based his strategy on the age of the accused, who was still legally a minor. The attorney emphasized the young man's difficult childhood, during which he had lived with his alcoholic mother, often went hungry, and was mistreated by her partners. According to the defense, this had broken Eric emotionally. He had become filled with anger toward the entire world. In addition, the lawyer tried to challenge the prosecution's version of events by portraying Sean as someone who might have had an interest in murdering his family. All of this sounded absurd. No life insurance policies were found that could have given Sean even the slightest financial motive. There were no serious disagreements between the spouses. The only constant source of conflict had always been Eric. In addition, Sean's alibi was complete. During the search of the Sweeney family home, investigators found the teenager's journals. According to the prosecution, he had been planning the crime. Purpose was revenge for a long time. The exact reason for the teenager's anger, nevertheless, remained a mystery. He probably took his brothers and sister-in-law's attempts to push him toward normal behavior, employment, and basic respect for other people very badly. The journal described numerous conflicts that Sean also confirmed, although he regarded them as part of the difficult process of raising a troubled teenager. Unfortunately, the boy's anger escalated rapidly and reached a point at which Eric could no longer control himself. There were other teenagers in his social circle who did not deny that he had often wished death upon Sean and Sean's relatives. Shortly before the tragedy, he began thinking about how he could cause brother the greatest possible pain. At parties, he talked about how he would kill Sean's wife and children. But everyone considered this tasteless, dark humor and paid no attention to the strange teenager. Notably, all of these young people also had behavioral problems and repeatedly experienced conflicts with their own families. When the established defense strategies proved unlikely to succeed, the lawyer tried to argue that the teenager was not criminally responsible because of mental incapacity. He even twisted the story told by a neighbor about a cat Eric had allegedly killed and presented it as possible evidence of mental illness. The psychiatric evaluations took some time. Independent experts were found who assessed Eric as criminally responsible without major limitations. All of this contradicted the defense's claims. The teenager had no documented medical history of such an illness. He had never previously sought medical help, but the lawyer blamed Sean for that, claiming that Sean had ignored warning signs and failed to provide his brother with appropriate treatment. This argument also seemed unconvincing. By then, communication with investigators in the interrogation room had become routine for the suspected perpetrator. He showed a level of emotional control that is unusual for many offenders. There were no signs at all that the young man was legally insane. Gradually, the decision was made to focus on preparing a solid prosecution case. Everything necessary was available, including the murder weapon, bearing Eric's fingerprints. Unexpectedly, the young man pleaded guilty. This happened a few weeks before the trial was due to begin. For Sean, it was an enormous relief. He continued to suffer deeply because of the terrible betrayal by his own brother. Eric's lawyer supported his decision to confess. It was assumed that doing so would reduce the scope of his guilt and lower the sentence. In fact, the charge of evidence tampering was dropped. The defense attorney also claimed that after the triple murder, his client had intended to take his own life, which was why he had driven to an isolated place with the pistol, but then panicked and decided not to do it. The defendant himself could not provide any specific reason for the crime, but said that he had loved this family. Now, the central question remained: how should Eric be sentenced? After all, he had committed the crime at the age of 16 and was still legally considered a minor. This could have had a significant effect on the judgment. Theoretically, he might have received a comparatively short prison sentence and could have been released after reaching adulthood. That possibility triggered a wave of public outrage. Up to that point, concerned citizens had repeatedly asked why law enforcement had remained inactive for so long, despite the numerous warnings from the family. Now, outrage over the consideration of Eric's age was added to those accusations, but the crime itself and the young man's behavior shortly before it showed that he posed a significant danger. It was decided that he would be treated as an adult. The prosecutor requested a prison sentence of at least 97 years, 35 years to life for Kassandra's death, as well as 40 years to life for the death of each boy. After Eric pleaded guilty, the charges were reduced to 3 counts of second-degree murder. The court proceedings were conducted through a simplified procedure. Taking his confession into account, 19-year-old Eric was sentenced in October 2025 to 60 years in prison. He would be eligible for parole in 2075, when Eric would be 68 years old. It is unlikely that he will have to spend his entire life in prison. Sean is aware of this and remains deeply worried. He is still trying to have the possibility of parole removed. Some relatives of the victims openly expressed the wish that Eric would die or suffer severely in prison. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.